If you're alone camping and the stars go out, make sure to keep the fire going. The journey to the trail took several hours by car. As I veered off the main highway and onto a smaller road, I felt a profound sense of solitude envelop me. I've always been keen on hiking, though recently my usual trails had become increasingly crowded. This time I opted for a lesser known path I had heard about in passing, but knew little regarding its details. This particular trail wound its way toward a swath of untouched wilderness, spanning hundreds of miles of raw, natural beauty. It was part of a national park, albeit mentioned only in passing on the park's official website, a likely indicator of its remote location, far removed from the more frequented path. The trail was only reachable via a road that seemed to lead into oblivion, enhancing its allure for someone seeking solitude. My intention was to immerse myself in the wilderness, camping out overnight beneath a starlit sky, residing in a desert state, which I prefer to keep anonymous. I anticipated a clear, moonless night. Perfect for stargazing. Having explored the well-trodden day trails nearby, I was eager for a more secluded experience, far from the usual bustle. The drive suggested I had chosen the right spot for solitude as the road was deserted, a promising sign for a peaceful retreat. Upon arriving, I exited the main road onto a gravelly parking area, my tires crunching softly as I came to a halt. The parking lot was a modest, unsealed patch of land beside the highway, marked only by a weathered signpost that declared the entrance to the national park. The parking area was nearly vacant, save for one other car that appeared as though it hadn't moved in years. Its tires were flat, not from punctures, but seemingly from long-term abandonment. I stepped out of my car, stretched, and surveyed the area. My eyes caught the trailhead marker, a low sign nearby. I gave the other car a second glance, its presence a silent sentinel in this vast expanse of wilderness. Dust enveloped every surface, a stark contrast to the light coating on my car from the journey. The other vehicle, however, was thickly layered with dust, untouched and unspoiled by vandals or the elements. No windows were shattered. There was no sign of forced entry or abandonment. It seemed as though it had been there for ages, and I puzzled over why the Park Service hadn't towed it away yet. Planning to notify the park authorities once I returned home, I opened the back door of my car and retrieved my backpack, hat, and rifle. I had debated whether to bring the rifle, given its weight and my hope that it wouldn't be necessary. However, memories of a recent unnerving encounter with a coyote during an overnight hike convinced me. It was a small .22 caliber, manageable, and packed in a lightweight case beside my other gear. I slathered on sunscreen, covering my arms and neck, and then shut off my phone after informing my sister of my plans. Securing it along with my keys, I hoisted my gear onto my shoulders and began the ascent on the trail. A few hundred yards in, I paused, detecting a faint odor on the breeze. It was faint but distinctly unpleasant, a hint of decay carried by the warm wind that brushed against my face. Muttering to myself about the stench of death, I was relieved when the breeze and the smell temporarily subsided. Eager to distance myself from the source of the odor, I quickened my pace. The absence of scavenging buzzards was odd, but I had no desire to investigate further, especially if the wind returned. The remainder of my hike was peaceful, weaving through the desert shrubland on a clear, well-trodden path. The landscape changed as I pressed on, the terrain becoming hillier. Gasping slightly from the effort, I reached the crest of a rise, only to find the trail evening out into a broad, open plateau ahead. As the sun indicated it was mid-afternoon, I decided it was the perfect time and place to set up camp. A few minutes' walk from the trail led me to a flat area where the brush had been cleared, revealing a previous campsite marked by faint traces of a campfire, bits of charcoal and scorched earth. I set down my pack and rifle case beside the remnants of the old fire and began the task of gathering firewood. The surrounding area, dotted with low, dead bushes and shrubs, provided ample fuel. After over an hour of collecting and another half hour of breaking the wood into manageable pieces, I had enough to keep a fire burning through the night. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the temperature dropped, prompting me to admire my substantial pile of firewood. I had probably gathered more than necessary, but I preferred to err on the side of caution. Lighting the fire, I watched as the last rays of sunlight vanished, replaced by the growing crackle of flame. The stench lingered in the background, less intense but still present. Once the flare-up from the fire diminished, the darkness enveloped everything more deeply. I glanced around and felt an involuntary shiver. The darkness had deepened alarmingly fast. Looking up, I regretted choosing a moonless night for this excursion. I turned back towards the fire and suddenly froze. Something was amiss. A blink, a hard stare into the sky, and a realization hit me. The stars had vanished. Moments before, the sky had been sprinkled with countless twinkling lights, and now there was nothing. It was as if the wind had snuffed them out like candles. All around, an oppressive blackness pressed against the small dome of light cast by my campfire. "What the hell?" I muttered to myself, scanning the surrounding darkness. The temperature of the air hadn't changed. It was cool, but not cold. However, a chilling sense of unease began to settle over me. I shivered once more, adding some branches to the fire in a futile attempt to ward off the creeping dread. I zipped up my jacket tightly as the once visible outlines of nearby shrubs and boulders vanished into the blackness. The horizon had disappeared. The black sky seamlessly merged with the distant mountains, creating a curtain of darkness. Straining to see anything beyond the immediate vicinity became impossible as the darkness seemed to crush inwards. In desperation, I retrieved my phone from my pack, turning it on and fumbling for the flashlight app. The harsh beam from my phone's flash cut through the darkness momentarily before flickering out as the phone shut down. Repeated attempts to power it back on were futile. The screen remained dark. Cursing under my breath, I searched for my keys, found the pin light attached, and switched it on, only for it to flicker and die as well. After several useless taps, I gave up, repacking my phone and keys. Surrounded by an unnerving void, I could barely see beyond 20 feet from the fire. The light seemed to retract towards the flames as if being swallowed by the surrounding darkness, enhancing my isolation and fear. The only sound was the campfire's crackle. The earlier whistling wind had ceased. That horrific stench lingered, suggesting something decayed nearby. Then a startling noise broke the silence, a thick, wet sound akin to someone clearing their throat. My stomach sank, and I caught my breath, frozen with a sudden realization. I was not alone. Peering into the direction of the sound, I caught fleeting glimpses of light in the darkness. 2 small flashes. A chill crawled up my spine as I realized something was out there, just beyond the light's reach, observing me. It reminded me of a time at my sister's house, her little dog watching me with its eyes reflecting light from a dark hallway while I sat in the illuminated living room. The eyes I saw now were different. Not the low glow of a small dog, but rather about 6 feet off the ground, far too high for any common predator like a coyote or even a mountain lion. As fear welled up inside me, I found myself oddly detached, analyzing the situation as though from afar. Instinctively, I shouted, "Kaya, get out of here!" while standing and waving my arm. The creature didn't flee. Instead, the eyes lowered as if it had ducked its head. My heart pounded as I maneuvered, placing the campfire between myself and the mysterious observer. It mirrored my movements, circling as I did, maintaining its distance but never breaking its gaze. I halted and faced it squarely. It responded in kind, stopping to stare back. I noted eerily that while my movements crunched the gravel, its movements were utterly silent, contributing to an overwhelming sense of otherworldliness. The darkness concealed its form, with only those haunting eyes visible, a slightly darker shape against the black. Crouching down, I grabbed a rock and hurled it toward the glowing eyes. The rock arced through the air and disappeared into the darkness. I was certain of my aim, yet heard only the soft crunch of the rock hitting the gravel. No impact. The eyes continued to bob slightly in the darkness, undeterred and enigmatic. The creature was undeterred by my presence, edging ever closer with each tense moment. Cautiously, I reached for my rifle case, quietly unzipping it to withdraw my .22. I worked the bolt, loading a round with practiced ease, even as the creature adjusted its position, its eyes lowering slightly as though it was preparing to strike. Gripping the safety, I clicked it off and braced the rifle against my shoulder, aiming just below the eerie glint of its eyes where I imagined its body might be. "Don't make me use this," I shouted, hoping it would retreat. Instead, a grotesque, wet growling sound emanated from it, like the crunch of a dog chewing bone. I tightened my grip and fired. The rifle's crack shattered the night's silence, a stark, thunderous echo in the still air. I squinted into the darkness, my heart racing. The creature had recoiled but hadn't retreated. It was still coiled in that menacing pose. There was no way my shot had missed at such a close range. Frantically, I worked the bolt, chambering another round, then another, each shot echoing into the night. After the 5th crack, a hollow click signaled an empty chamber. My magazine was spent. Panic surged as I realized I had no more ammunition. The creature shifted slightly, growling again. Its eyes blinked out for an instant, lost in the firelight, and I could no longer see its form. With trembling hands, I shifted my hold, gripping the rifle's warm barrel like a makeshift club. Something heavy struck my back, and I spun around, instinctively swinging the rifle with all my strength. It cut through the air, hitting nothing. Panting, I stepped back, the creature's eyes once again visible just outside the firelight's reach. Confusion gripped me as I wondered what had struck me, given the creature hadn't approached the light. Looking down, I found a single hiking boot at my feet. I quickly glanced up. The creature was still there, just watching. I turned my attention back to the boot, noting its worn fabric and the reddish-brown mud caked on it. Pausing in shock, I stooped to pick up the boot and carried it closer to the firelight for a better examination. The realization hit me hard. The boot was encrusted with dried blood. My heart raced, a chill of fear running through me as the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end and goosebumps covered my skin. I dropped to one knee, gasping, the words, "Oh, shit," escaping my lips in a whisper. Rising unsteadily, I faced the creature, my voice breaking the silence with a desperate shout, "What do you want with me?" There was no response. The creature remained still, its intentions a mystery. My anxiety spiked as a branch in the fire popped loudly, but the sound sparked an idea. I noticed a partially burned branch, flames licking just one end. Gripping the flaming stick, I turned back toward the creature, which growled menacingly. Its growl intensified into a snarl as I hurled the branch toward it. The stick cut through the darkness, briefly illuminating the creature's form as it desperately avoided the light. The creature was immense, as large as a bear, but with a slender, lean build that seemed to absorb the darkness around it. It moved with an unnatural grace, its long legs and distorted torso oddly proportioned. It used its front limbs to hoist itself onto its hind legs, then skittered away frantically, its body twitching grotesquely. It towered nearly 8 feet tall on its hind legs, its posture never fully upright, giving it a perpetually hunched appearance. The fleeting glimpse of its face in the firelight was horrifying. It looked almost human, but horribly distorted, with a face elongated like a horse's, but with a grotesquely wide mouth full of decaying, oversized teeth. Collapsing to the ground in shock, I sat huddled, hugging my knees and rocking. Gratitude welled up in me for the instinct that had driven me to gather so much wood earlier. The creature's eyes had ceased their restless movement, and now it seemed content to merely sit in the shadows, watching me. I met its gaze, my mind racing as I contemplated my next move. For a long stretch, neither of us broke our stare, locked in a silent standoff. The distant howl of a coyote pierced the night, causing the creature's eyes to flicker in that direction, bobbing as if it were sniffing the air. It grunted, a sound of apparent dissatisfaction before turning away. I caught a fleeting glimpse of its form as it moved toward the source of the howls, disappearing into the darkness, its foul stench dissipating with its departure. For a moment, I remained frozen, then suddenly sprang to action. My boots struggled for traction on the gravel as I quickly slung my pack over one shoulder and the rifle over the other. Torn between the safety of the fire and the urge to flee, I hesitated, my heart pounding with fear. Mustering courage, I took a tentative step away from the fire. The crunch of gravel underfoot seemed thunderous in the quiet night. Scanning the darkness, I found no trace of the creature. Emboldened, I took another step, then another, each crunch a sharp echo in the silent night, and began to make my way briskly toward the trail. I had barely covered a dozen paces when the familiar stench hit me again, stopping me cold. Turning slightly, I caught the sinister glint of eyes in the darkness, the reflection of the fire in its gaze, unmistakable. A low growl resonated through the stillness, and instinctively, I began to retreat, each step cautious as I moved back toward the safety of the firelight. I'm back at the fireside. I quickly set down my gear and sat, never taking my eyes off the darkness where the creature lurked. Just then, another coyote howl echoed in the distance, a haunting reminder of the wilderness enclosing me. The creature grunted dismissively before melting back into the darkness, leaving me to grapple with my fear. I realized I was effectively trapped. Running was too risky. The darkness had already disabled my phone and flashlight, and any torch I could fashion from the fire wouldn't last long enough to guide me safely back to my car. My lighter was woefully inadequate in keeping the creature at bay. Suddenly, the night air was pierced by a coyote's howl that abruptly turned into a snarl. My ears strained as the sounds transformed into desperate yelps, then silence, followed by the gruesome noises of flesh tearing and bones crunching. I sat frozen, my heart pounding fiercely. As the fire crackled, I heard a soft grunt and turned just in time to see a long, unnaturally thin limb reach out from the shadows, grasping the dead coyote by the tail and slowly dragging it back into the dark. The limb was difficult to discern clearly, as if it emanated darkness itself. The hand at its end appeared almost human but grotesquely altered, with excessively long fingers that bent at multiple unnatural joints, reminiscent of tarantula legs attached to the end of a stick. As it pulled the coyote away, it emitted a pained noise, perhaps agitated by the light. The coyote vanished into the shadow, leaving behind a trail of blood in the dust. Soon after, I heard the terrible sounds of ripping and squelching. It was clear the creature was dismembering and consuming its prey. The feeding noises eventually ceased, replaced by a grunt that conveyed a sense of dissatisfaction. It then resumed its silent vigil, its gaze fixed intently on me. It was evident that the creature's interest extended beyond the coyote. It was focused on me. Responding instinctively, I gathered more branches and fortified the fire, then settled back to watch the eerie glow of its eyes in the darkness. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly as I maintained the fire and kept my eyes locked on the creature, which intermittently grunted or growled in the stillness. As the night wore on, exhaustion began to overtake me. The adrenaline that had fueled my vigilance was fading, leaving me overwhelmingly tired. Just a second, I told myself, my eyelids growing heavy. I'll just close my eyes for a moment. My head started to nod forward, but a chilling, wet laugh from behind me snapped me back to alert. Realizing I had dozed off, I saw the fire had dwindled to mere embers, casting only a faint glow. The creature had taken advantage of the dimming light to move closer, unbeknownst to my weary senses. I leapt up, throwing branches onto the dying embers in a frantic attempt to revive the fire. Dropping to my hands and knees, I blew into the embers, coaxing the flames back to life. As the light grew, I glimpsed the creature squatting alarmingly close. It was perched like a dog, its long hind legs folded, with what appeared to be knees raised near its head and its arms extended downward, supporting its upright torso. The creature's eyes gleamed momentarily as it shifted, hissing and pushing itself backward to escape the increasing light. As it disappeared into the shadows, I caught the unsettling sound of a long tongue smacking against lips. In the brief illumination, I had seen its eyes more clearly. They radiated not only hunger and pain, but a disturbing intelligence, almost human-like. As it resumed its watch, it was no longer silent. The creature's growls and grunts increased in both volume and frequency, betraying a sense of desperation. It paced around the perimeter of the firelight, periodically vanishing only to reappear and emit a growl from the darkness, yet it dared not approach the light directly. I remained silent throughout, continuously feeding the dwindling fire, hoping my supply of wood would suffice. Suddenly, the creature let out a new sound, a sharp, high-pitched hiss. It paused, glanced skyward, then fixed its gaze on me again with a noise that sounded almost disgusted. Shortly after, the wind picked up, carrying the creature's foul stench once more, but then, just as quickly, it was gone. With the departure of the creature, the oppressive darkness lifted, revealing the pre-dawn deep blue of the sky. Stars twinkled faintly above, and as the sky brightened, the first hint of sunrise edged above the horizon. The returning light was a profound relief. Joy overwhelmed me as daylight broke, a stark contrast to the terror of the night. I waited, letting the sun climb higher into the sky, warming the earth around me. Only when it felt safe, under the watchful eye of the sun, did I finally gather my belonging. As I left, I shuddered one last time at the sight of the mangled coyote remains, eager to leave the horrors of the night behind. A grisly patch of gray fur and shattered bones marked the remains of the coyote. I jogged without pause, my pace quickening whenever the wind carried a foul scent my way. Hours later, exhausted and nearly collapsing, I finally saw the start of the trail leading down to the car park. Continuing my jog, I yanked my backpack from my shoulders, holding it in one hand while awkwardly balancing the gun case in the other. I rummaged for my car keys as I transitioned from the hard trail to the gravel of the parking lot. Nearly losing my balance, I managed to maintain my footing and hasten towards my car. Key fumbling seemed to last forever, but I finally flung the car door open, tossed my belongings across to the passenger side, and practically threw myself into the driver's seat, hands clenching the wheel tightly. Catching my reflection in the rearview mirror, I was struck by the sight of my haggard, wild-eyed appearance, with trails of tears cutting through the dust on my face, sobbing from the relief of nearing safety. Turning back to glance at the trail's entrance, I noticed the swirling dust as the wind picked up again. Hastily, I shoved the key into the ignition, the engine roared to life, and I maneuvered the car swiftly out of the parking lot and onto the road, accelerating away from the nightmare. It wasn't until I reached the main highway that my heart rate and breathing began to normalize. Driving back to the city took fewer hours than the journey out had, my speed well above the limit. Finally, safe at home, I locked the doors and let the sunlight flood through the windows. After plugging in my phone and seeing it power up, I quickly messaged my sister to prevent a search and rescue call. A few days later, I contacted the Park Service to report being stalked by mountain lions, prompting them to remove the area from their website, a precaution since the trail was seldom visited anyway. I omitted the details of the abandoned car and the bloody boot, keeping the true nature of my encounter to myself. Who would believe such a tale? There was no reason to put others at risk. Subsequently, I began researching local folklore, but the eerie similarities to my experience soon made me stop. In my research, I stumbled upon a description that sent shivers down my spine, aligning eerily with the creature I had encountered. I quickly decided to stop delving deeper, trying instead to erase the memories from my mind, but the effort proved futile. Now, every time I enter a dark room, my breath catches as I fumble for the light switch, the fear palpable. I rarely hike anymore, and when I do, I stick to well-traveled paths, avoiding any overnight adventures. The incident motivated me to request a transfer from my job, far from the haunting desert winds, to a place where the cold snow provides a stark contrast to the heat I once endured. This experience has left me with many questions, though one looms larger than the rest, haunting me. If the creature from the folklore is real, what other mysteries lurk unseen in the dark? It's a question I'm not sure I want answered, as the truth might be more terrifying than the unknown.